The United States withdrawal from the Kyoto Protocol. Introduction. The Kyoto Protocol was adopted in 1997 in Japan in response to global concerns about climate change. The accord was a multinational agreement targeted at reducing greenhouse gas emissions by industrialized countries. It suggested that industrialized countries had more greenhouse emissions than developing countries. Therefore, the Kyoto Protocol placed more burdens and responsibilities on developed countries. It grouped countries into Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries. Developed countries were grouped into Annex 1, while the developing countries, into non-Annex 1. Emission limitations were placed on countries under Annex 1 only, while non-Annex 1 were only supposed to invest voluntarily in projects intended to lower greenhouse emissions. However, the United States withdrew from the agreement, although it had been involved in ratifying the original protocol. This essay will discuss more on the pros and cons of the withdrawal by the United States from the Kyoto Protocol. Pros of the decision. The withdrawal of the U.S. from the Kyoto Protocol had a positive impact on the economy. Its participation in the accord would have negatively impacted the economy. The emission of carbon dioxide is directly linked to energy consumption. Withdrawing from carbon dioxide production would indicate less production of carbon-intensive fuels such as coal. United States withdrawal led to increased output in the energy sector. This can be attributed to increased competitiveness against countries under the protocol, for example, Japan. Donald Trump had pledged to withdraw from the accord, citing that it would negatively affect the manufacturing sector and jobs in the U.S. He further mentioned that the accord only targeted developed countries like the United States, excluding India and China, as the agreement was in the 90s. This can be seen as biased considering that China and India are among the largest greenhouse gas emitters in the world. The signing of the Kyoto Protocol would require interference with domestic policies. This would consequently increase the price of natural gas, oil, and coal. An increase in the price of these products would result in a high cost of living for Americans. Thriving businesses depend on natural gas, oil, and coal for their success, which positively contributes to the economy. The country would have been disadvantaged if it had complied with the agreement. In addition, the country was no longer bound to the Kyoto Protocol policies, which promoted restrictions on domestic energy production and fossil fuel. Oil production, which the U.S. has ventured into, is one of the profitable areas and has promising economic growth. Predictions indicate that the U.S. may overtake Russia, the leading country in oil production. This venture was restricted when the U.S. was under the protocol. The Kyoto Protocol required the U.S. to contribute enormously towards attaining the targets of its aims. For example, when the U.S. was under the protocol, President Obama pledged $3 million from the taxpayers' pockets. The amount paid would have increased over time in achieving the accord's objective. Although it would positively impact climate change, the hefty cost would have negatively impacted taxpayers. The citizens raised concerns about the discriminatory terms and wanted to know the accountability and transparency of the money in 2015. Cons of the withdrawal. However, the withdrawal from the Kyoto Protocol significantly affected the international market of tradable permits by buyers and sellers. Retreating from it meant reduced demand for permits for greenhouse emissions. The lower permit price would significantly affect all countries' research and development investments. The United States had a large impact on research and development investment, and its withdrawal from the Kyoto Protocol greatly impacted other annex countries. This, therefore, makes it difficult for the other countries to meet the demands of the protocol. The countries under it have to reduce their supply or increase their demand for carbon permits to meet the accord's target. U.S. defection from the Kyoto Protocol has a negative impact on climate change. Emissions of greenhouse gases increased, and there was a reduction in the research and development investments in energy-saving options. This would result in more damage to the climate, which would result in increased investments. This would further increase the energy demand and increase greenhouse gas emissions. Implementation of the second-order effect would result in further emission permit demand increase and a reduction in their supply. Reducing energy savings research and development investments would reduce the world's stock of knowledge, resulting in an emission output ratio increase. This leads to increased emissions in all countries and, therefore, a need to increase the demand for emission permits and their reduced supply to meet the Kyoto Protocol's target. Consequently, the permit price increase, therefore, offsetting the initial price permit fall, initiated the U.S. withdrawal. The Kyoto Protocol advocated for the reduction of climate change caused by greenhouse gas emissions. U.S. withdrawal has resulted in increased production of ozone-depleting gases, leading to an increase in environmental change. The dangers of ozone layer depletion are baffling, yet the U.S. withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, which would prevent this from happening. The United States is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China. This makes it more vital for the U.S. to unite with other greenhouse emitters countries to prevent climate change from progressing. Global havoc is likely due to the U.S. withdrawal from the protocol. International relations between the U.S. and other countries under the Kyoto Protocol were affected after it retreated from the accord. The retreat demonstrates that the U.S. is unwilling to cooperate with other nations in curbing climate change despite its awareness of the negative impacts of greenhouse gases on the environment. This will shamble the diplomatic relations with other nations, as reported by the Conference Board of Canada. Since the U.S. is the leading producer of greenhouse gases, its retreat from the Kyoto Protocol will make other countries have little impact on the efforts to reduce ozone layer depletion. Conclusion. To sum up, the Kyoto Protocol had good intentions of curbing the climate change caused by the emission of greenhouse gases. The environmental changes caused by greenhouse emissions are dreadful, and thus a need for policies curbing this was necessary. However, the U.S. withdrew from the accord because of economic reasons. This retreat has advantages and disadvantages. The pros are focused on economic growth without the restrictions of the accord. The negative effects point to the harmful impacts of climate change associated with greenhouse emissions.